I'm Margaret Dawkins. I'm the Executive Director in the Department for Communities and your MC for tonight. The department is bringing you tonight's presentation in partnership with the WA Council of Social Services, Child Australia, and the Commissioner of Children and Young People's Thinker in Residence program. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Noongar country in the land of the Whadjuk people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This session has attracted over 500 parents, early childhood educators, outside school hours staff, and others just interested in the well-being of children. We're recording tonight's session for all the people who couldn't get in or who are in regional areas. And this recording after tonight will be able to be watched on both the Department for Communities website and on the Commissioner for Children and Young People's website. So if you'd like to tell colleagues that weren't able to come today, they can have a viewing later on. Housekeeping Matters. Toilets are accessible from the foyer, probably best not to go out this door, from the foyer outside near the box office. In the event of an emergency, if you could listen to the information that's coming out over the PA, and the exits are at the rear of the theatre and at both these sides of the stage, and the mustering point is on that big grassy area we saw as we were coming in. Now's the time to turn off those mobile phones, so they're all very well behaved, not many people bending down. I'm pleased to see that there's some young children here in the audience tonight. It's good to be able to involve them in your activities, but should they become more vocal than the person speaking on the stage, please feel free to wander up to the back with them and come back when they're a little bit quieter. Again, the event's being recorded, and as a consequence of that, please no sort of photographs during the proceedings. We've left for you a whole lot of literature outside from all the organisations that are bringing this to you, the Department for Communities, the Commissioner, WACOS and Child Australia, so please help yourselves to that afterwards. I'd really like to thank St Mary's College, who's lent us this fabulous auditorium, to their principal, Mrs Lynn Thompson. Thank you, Lynn, for being so gracious as to allow us to be here. I think you'll all agree it's an amazing place. And thank you for coming out on a cold winter's night. I'd now like to introduce to you Jenny Perkins, who's the Director General of the Department for Communities, and she'll tell you a little bit about our department and why we've chosen to partner with the Children's Commissioner to bring Dr Shanker to you. So Jenny Perkins.
Sorry, Marg's a bit taller. Thanks, Marg. Can I just formally acknowledge Michelle Scott, Commissioner for Children and Young People, Dr Stuart Shanker, the 2012 Thinker in Residence, Mrs Lynn Thompson, Principal, St Mary's Anglican Girls' School, Mr Chris Twomey from West Australian Council of Social Services, Mr Dawson Rule, CEO of Child Australia, ladies and gentlemen, parents one and all. Look, good evening, and it's a pleasure to see so many interested parents joining us this evening, and on particularly such a cold winter's night. In this busy world, I know it's particularly difficult to make the time for extra commitments, and so I do sincerely thank you all for your interest in coming tonight. The Minister, the Honourable Robin McSweeney, MLC, Minister for Child Protection, Community Services, Seniors and Volunteering, Women's Interests and Youth, is unable to attend herself this evening. However, the Minister had the pleasure of listening to Dr Shanker speak last night, and she sends her best wishes for a stimulating and informative forum tonight, which I'm sure is what we'll have ahead of us. I'm sure that many of you here today are concerned that your children struggle with today's bombardment of choices and decisions. You may worry about the thought of your children suffering from stress, and you may be concerned about your children being at risk of mental, physical or behavioural problems into the future. Importantly, as parents, we can help equip our children to cope with what they're facing. But to do that, we need information, we need support, and we need strategies. Strategies to equip our children and young people to deal with the very busy environment that many of them are living in. Strategies that will boost their mental health and well-being. Tonight, Dr Shanker comes to us as one of Canada's foremost child development specialists, and he'll talk to us about the importance of self-regulation for children's learning and drawing from his own significant research and the growing evidence base in this area. Importantly, we'll hear from Dr. Shanker about how children can be shown to regulate their own moods and behaviour, and what we as parents can do to support this, and how this could be the key to improving our children's long-term physical and mental health into the future. I'm proud to say that tonight's event is presented by the Department for Communities in partnership with the Commissioner for Children and Young People, the West Australian Council of Social Service and Child Australia. We believe that raising healthy, happy children is the key to building strong and vibrant communities. And what happens early in the lives of our children really shapes every child's future, including what they will be like as teenagers and adults. We also recognise that it takes collaboration to raise healthy, happy children. And in this regard, the Department for Communities works with families, communities, other government agencies, and our non-government partners to give children the best possible start to life. You may be familiar with some of the department's programs in this regard, in particular Parenting WA, which offers a range of free statewide services to assist families. That includes the Parenting WA helpline, a 24-hour telephone service to assist anyone with parenting queries regarding pre-birth to 18 years. And it's an excellent port of call for families, individuals or agencies who are seeking general information about parenting, childcare and early years activities. We also have a library that we make available through a free postal service and a range of courses that are outlined on our website that gives you an idea of what might be happening in your local area. I'd urge you all to look at the information available after tonight's event across both the Department for Communities and our other partners to give you an idea of where else you might go to. Finally, I'd like to thank the Commissioner for Children and Young People in particular for the opportunity to once again partner with her in such an important community event. And whether you've come here tonight as a new or prospective parent, or like myself as a parent of 2 teenagers, I'm sure that you'll take away with you some gems of wisdom and inspiration. So enjoy.
I'd now like to introduce the Commissioner for Children and Young People, Michelle Scott, who will set the context why she's invited Dr Shanker and something about her Thinker in Residence program. I keep calling you Dr Scott. Are you on the way to a PhD? Yeah, Michelle Scott, thanks.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting tonight and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. We had a keynote presentation last night at Wesley College with, I think as Margaret said, between 400 and 500 people. We all learnt a lot, and I'm sure that you will be engaged with Dr Shanker's discussion tonight. I also would just like to acknowledge Mrs Lynn Thompson and thank her for making available St Mary's in this wonderful facility tonight. When we arrived, it was great to see in neon lights, Thinker in Residence 2012, and it was also great to have someone show us where to park the car, so thank you very much. It's a wonderful venue and facility. In 2011, I initiated the Thinker in Residence program, and the basic aim of that program is to stimulate and promote discussion about an important issue confronting children and young people in Western Australia. In 2011, I invited Mr Paul Collard from the UK, and the focus of the residency in 2011 was creativity and education. In 2012, I decided, having talked to many parents, many organisations, having listened to the concerns of teachers and parents as I travelled around the state, that there was an important phenomenon happening here in Western Australia. In 2011, I conducted my first independent inquiry into the mental health and well-being of children and young people. I received over 141 submissions to that inquiry. Many of the submissions indicated that they were concerned about the increasing incidence of anxiety, depression, aggression, and conduct disorders amongst children and young people in Western Australia. And they were concerned that we should do something about it. Some of you may be aware that in February this year I tabled a report in the West Australian Parliament on how children and young people are faring in Western Australia. And the good news is generally children and young people are doing very well across key areas of well-being. However, one area stands out, that by the time children start school, 1 in 4 of them are developmentally vulnerable. My mental health inquiry and my concern about those very early years of a child's life, and that we need to focus on those very early years as a critical point of intervention, is one of the key reasons why I decided to invite Dr Stuart Shanker to Western Australia to be our 2012 Thinker in Residence. Dr Shanker is a distinguished professor at York University. He's a leading child development specialist. He's had great influence in Canada, in influencing the government in Ontario and elsewhere to particularly develop a framework and specific programs that arise out of that framework in relation to self-regulation of children and young people. I think tonight the focus of the conversation will be very practical, because as Commissioner, I'm not only concerned about identifying what the problems are, but I'm also very keen to focus on what are the solutions and what are the strengths that we have here in Western Australia. What are the things that we have working for us in assisting kids to better self-regulate, and what can we learn from someone like Dr Stuart Shanker and his international experience and knowledge, which can add value to our situation here in Western Australia. Dr Shanker arrived, I think, Sunday night, and he's hardly drawn breath since he arrived. He's very keen to talk to parents. He has a lot of experience working in Canada with parents. It's my great privilege to invite Dr Stuart Shanker to speak to you tonight.
We've rolled out all these programs in Canada to enhance self-regulation. And the reason is we have a model of 6 core capacities that a child needs to develop to have a long, happy, healthy, physically and mentally healthy life. And so the core capacities are things like language and logical thinking, causal thinking. But the first core capacity is self-regulation. And we started getting data about the year 2000 showing that kids were having increasing problems with self-regulation. And this data has gotten worse. And as a result, we realized that because self-regulation is the foundation, the core for the development of these advanced capacities like language and logical thinking, we needed to start focusing on this initial level, and we needed to have programs brought into place that would help parents enhance the self-regulation of their kids. So we thought we'd done a wonderful job. We wrote all these documents and we agonized over every single word, and it was absolutely perfect, and we presented this to the public. And I got a message one day from the equivalent to Michelle, and she said, "You know, Stuart, it's really not going so well. We're not sure why." And one of the mistakes that we made, I think, in retrospect, was we didn't actually explain that self-regulation is not at all the same thing as self-control. Self-regulation is what makes self-control possible. And we all want our children to have self-control, and we want it from a relatively young age. And what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in the number of kids that have poor self-control. Okay? And Darren was asking me if I would mention this exchange that's going on right now in the papers about kids misbehaving in the cafe. So this is a sign of poor self-control. And the last thing I want to do is blame the parents. All they want is a coffee. But we want to understand why. What's going on here? And to do that, we need to understand self-regulation. And we know, for reasons I will try to go into a little tonight, that kids are having more trouble with self-regulation today than we've ever seen before. So the first question that we're going to do tonight is, what exactly is self-regulation? How does it differ from self-control? And then we'll move into, what can I do as a parent to enhance the self-regulation of my kids? Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is show you a movie. Lars, can we see our movie? Now, we started studying self-regulation in 1968. Not me, but my professors. And they designed a task. Oh, you're there. So they designed this task that we have now done. I must just tell you, academics are not very original. If we get a good experiment, we just keep on doing it and doing it. So there's a good side to that. And the good side is we've had a chance to study this experiment really carefully. So if you want to understand why we academics make so much money, you will be amazed at the sophistication of this experiment. Okay?
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
So it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
The best one of these that I've ever seen is that we had this little girl, and she hollows out the middle of her marshmallow and puts it back. And my friend who's a scientist doing it comes on, and then he says she is today a banker. So you understand how the experiment works, right? So what we're doing is we put a temptation in front of the child as close to their eye level as we can. So we really try to torment them. And we tell them that if they wait until I come back, they can have double. And if they eat it now, that's all they get. And we originally did this experiment in 1968. And the first discovery that they made was that 30% of all children can wait. 70% can't. This experiment has been repeated thousands of times all over the world. We've done it in different situations to try to exclude something about marshmallows in America. And we consistently get 30-70. And that, for psychologists, is very interesting. Furthermore, we can do this experiment when kids are 4 years old. So it tells us that children are, for some reason that we have to figure out, starting to differentiate at a very young age. Okay? So that in itself is reason enough to do this study. But the real interest of the study was that the guy who first did this, Walter Mischel, followed these kids. And in 1989, he published a paper reporting that the 30% who waited scored 210 points higher on their college entrance exams. Yeah, it's amazing. They're really amazing. I mean, that's a big, big difference. He also reported that they had 100% high school graduation. They had virtually no episodes of depression. They had almost no obesity. They earned more money, they went to college, they had stable relationships, they were almost immune to risky behaviors, drugs, sex, alcohol. So this, for a psychologist, is kind of scary. At the age of 4, you can make these predictions about a kid. Well, in a certain sense, it's kind of self-intuitive, right? Like in a certain sense, it makes sense that if a kid has good self-control, they're going to do better in life. But my job in the clinic I run is with the 70%. And what we wanted to know was, why are they having problems? And what can I do to enhance their self-control? That was our big deal. And so we spent a long time studying the 30%, trying to figure out, what have they got that makes them so special? We didn't really get anywhere. And we had a sort of epiphany, and it's really, I owe my career to my children. My partner, I was trained in psychiatry by a man called Stanley Greenspan, who was, without question, the greatest developmental psychiatrist of my time. And Stanley, in the year 2000, began writing these articles saying that white sugar is toxic. He literally had this one article that white sugar is a poison. And so you have to do everything you can to wean your children off white sugar, refined sugar. As it happens, we've had some studies just the last year or two showing that he was wrong. So don't get anxious about white sugar. Obviously, we want to control it, but it's not a toxin. Unfortunately for me, I have a sweet tooth, and my wife read these. And at the time, my children were 4 and 1. And so she decides we're going to become a sugar-free house. And so she throws out all the sugar, and instead she started to bake with tofu. So those who are laughing have tasted things baked with tofu. Those who are not laughing don't know what it tastes like. It's really awful. And just to give you an idea of how successful this experiment was with her idea was, based on Stan, that if children never develop the taste bud for white sugar, they will never eat it. And they'll naturally gravitate to eating carrots. And we're just going into our spring now in Canada, and we were doing spring cleaning, and I was weeding out the pine needles, and underneath the pine trees were hundreds of candy wrappers. So this didn't work. But in the meantime, I love my wife, and I'm scared of her. So I put up with the tofu and would smile in front of the children, but the kids knew. Anyways, one day I was at the lab, and we had a kind of a crisis at the lab that day, and it was to the point where I had my university president calling every hour to threaten to shut us down. And my children heard about this, and they were out shopping with their mom, and they bought me 6 treacle tarts, and they hid the treacle tarts at the bottom of Mom's shopping basket. So I got home at midnight that night, and it had been a long, hard day, and everyone was asleep, and on the kitchen table were 6 treacle tarts. And I swear to God, I was just like those twins. for about 6 seconds. And then the tarts were all gone. So now you have to understand that sugar does give us an awful lot of brain energy. It's short-lived, and then it plummets. So for about 10 minutes, I could return to being a rational scientist. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's very interesting. Why did I do this? On a normal night, I wouldn't have touched them. On a normal night, I would have agreed that my wife had a good idea, or at the very least been afraid that she would come in and catch me eating them. So the very next morning, I went to my head of research, and I said, I want you to design the following experiment. I want to repeat this task twice. So we're going to do the test, and we're going to wait 30 minutes, and then we're going to do it again. Okay? Simple design. But here's the twist. The 30% who pass, the 30% who wait, I'm going to tire them. And we did it on 6-year-olds. And the way you tire a 6-year-old is with arithmetic. Arithmetic is very tiring for a 6-year-old brain. So that's exactly what we did. They did the task. We got our 30% of kids. Then we took those 30%. We had them do arithmetic for half an hour, and then we repeated the test. And guess what? Over half of them couldn't wait. That's interesting. Now I took my 70% and I rested them. So for their half an hour, I played soft music, I did deep breathing, active stretching, and I turned off the lights. We repeated the experiment, and over half of them could wait. This is fascinating. This is the essence of the distinction between self-regulation and self-control. Self-regulation is a story about how much gas the kid has in his tank. That's what it is. The gas for a child is glucose. And glucose is quite literally the fuel that the brain uses to do things like solve arithmetic, control impulses, pay attention, make friends, be a nice kid. The more a child's glucose is depleted, the harder it is for that child to pay attention. The harder it is for that child to play with other children. The harder it is for that child to stop from hitting or shouting. The problem with these children isn't that they lack self-control. The problem is they haven't got enough glucose to exercise self-control. And this is true of all of us. We are all exactly the same. It just so happens that with children, it's a little bit more pronounced. And the effects, if we mistreat them, if we respond in the wrong way, can be a little bit more serious. They can be a little bit more far-reaching. So now the question you should be asking yourself is, well, that's all very interesting. Why would my kid, so maybe some of you are thinking, well, wait a second, he's describing my kid. My kid has trouble paying attention, or my kid has, he can be pretty impulsive, or doesn't make friends that well, whatever. So why not? Okay, I understand, so he's burning more glucose. Why? So what did we discover? The 30% have kind of one life sweepstakes. They come into the world with a nervous system that can deal with enormous amounts of stress. They can have a stress, deal with the stress, and then recover. But for the other 70%, what we see is that if they have the same stress, if they are exposed to the same stress, they have a lot of trouble. For example, they may have a reaction to that stress which is way over the top. They get way too excited or way too upset. Or they may have the same response, but then they can't calm down. They have a lot of trouble returning back to that calm state once they're exposed to a stressor. Or they could be really all over the place. Like 1 second they're calm, and the next second they're excited, whatever. And it's called labile. It means very changeable. Or they might be having stress responses in inappropriate situations. I mean, a typical example is the kid who's standing in line at school and somebody puts their hand on his shoulder, maybe to get by, and the kid freaks out. Okay, so now the question becomes, okay, we see that what's going on with these 70% of the kids is they're very sensitive to stress. Now the question is why? Why are some children so, forgive me, that's a stressor for you, by the way, not from me. It doesn't particularly bother me. So why are some children so sensitive to stress? And the answer is, I mean, have they been born with like a weak stress system? Are they born with some kind of heightened sensitivity to stress? No, that's not the reason. The reason is they have way too much stress in their life. That's what the reason is. So I'm going to try to explain it to you, okay? Sorry, Lars, we're going to need you again because this thing's reverberating again. For you to get this, you have to understand what we mean by stress. You have to understand stress in a kind of a new way. Stress isn't just like the stress you feel because your boss is telling you you have to finish this by 12 o'clock. Stress for a child is a little bit more subtle and a little bit more complex. Now, let me give you an example. I work mostly with children with autism. If I had a child with autism and I brought him onto this stage with me, I would have, I don't know how long I've been talking, but I would have lost him the second I started. That echo that you hear is a stressor. For a child with autism, it is unbelievably overwhelming. So much so that he would almost certainly start to scream. These lights for a child with autism are a stressor. They hurt, physically hurt. So what we started to look at was the kinds of stressors that children are exposed to in the modern world. And that includes our stress, because we're highly stressed too. And here's the explanation of what's going on here. And this is the essence of self-regulation. Every time a child has a stressor, they have to expend energy. They have to use glucose. So they burn a little glucose in order to deal with that stressor, and then they recover. They go back to normal. They recover back to baseline. There's an evolutionary reason for this, and basically for our ancestors, stressors were a noise in the bushes. And so the whole nervous system shifts to deal with what that noise is. It's called fight or flight or freeze. Your whole nervous system shifts all of its energy. You know what? I'm going to explain this properly. Your whole nervous system shifts all of the energy on what may be a potential threat. And it shuts down what it normally does. I'll come back to that in 1 second. It shuts down what it normally does so that if it is a tiger, I can take off. That's the way the nervous system was designed. And then it says, oh, no, it wasn't a threat. It was just the wind. So you go back to baseline. What is baseline? Well, baseline is monitoring your internal bodily state. That's where most of your energy goes. It maintains a stable body temperature, 98.6 or 100, whatever it is in centigrade, 37. It monitors heart rate. It monitors body temperature. It monitors thirst. It monitors cell repair, metabolism. That's where most of our energy goes. And so what the body does is it shuts down this internal monitoring system so that all of the energy can go on what might be a threat. When we work with children that have way too much stress, these are the kinds of things we see. They don't know when they're tired. They don't know when they're hungry. When we've had a successful therapy, when we know that the intervention's been successful, the kid will come to us and say, I'm cold, can I have a jumper? I'm tired, I need to sit down now. Invariably, at the beginning of working with any child, they don't know these things. And that tells us there's been way too much stress in that child's life. And because there's been so much stress, the mechanism to come back to normal, the mechanism to come back to monitoring yourself has worn out. It's been overused. We talk about it as if it's a brake. And what's happening with this child is the brake pads are wearing down. So let's say I have a kid that's having an awful lot of trouble going to bed at night. It tells me the problem isn't that I'm doing something wrong as a parent. That tells me that my child is having way too much stress. And so what I'm going to do, if I want to help him get healthy sleep habits, is I got to figure out what are the sources of stress with my child. How can I reduce these stresses, and how can I teach my child the skills that he will need in order to be able to reduce stresses on his own as he gets older. This is what self-regulation is all about. So now the next question, and now it's all starting to come together. We can see that we have to understand, what are these stresses? What are the stresses we're talking about? Well, you want a huge stressor for kids? TV. TV is a massive stressor. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that we've done brain studies on this, and when children watch TV, you would not believe how much glucose they burn just watching TV. It doesn't make sense. It looks passive. They're just sitting there. But in fact, the brain is burning an enormous amount just watching. And there's two problems here. And the two problems are, one, he's burned all this energy, and we now know that in Canada, the average child watches 4 hours of television every single day. Okay, I don't know what the data is here, but it's the same in the US and Canada. I suspect you're not that different. This is scary for two reasons. It's scary because we know that the kid has burned way too much in this activity, and what might he have been doing had he not been watching TV? Well, guess what? If he hasn't watching TV, he'd be outside running around. And one of the paradoxes about exercise is that exercise actually produces more glucose than it burns. It produces more energy than it consumes. It was because that's how we were designed. We were designed to be running around. So guess what? We can correlate now sleep problems with number of hours spent watching TV. It's a very close correlation. I haven't even talked about video games. That's even worse. Okay, I'm not saying, in my own case, I was telling Michelle today, when we did these studies, I did it on my own son. There was a time when I was allowed to do experiments on my children till my wife found out. But when I saw the results, I quite literally threw the TV out. And my children were young enough. I live on an island. And I told them that, I'm going to get a repairman, but, it's hard to get somebody out to the island. And instead, I bought you 5 chickens. Chickens are very regulating for a kid. It's interesting, but it's true. Animals are very regulating. And within a couple of days, they had forgotten about it and have never asked for it since. And I've seen noticeable improvements fantastic improvements in my children's sleep etiquette. That's just one example. So now what we start to look at is, what are the stressors on children today? Well, here's another stressor. Living in a city is a stressor. It's an awful lot of stimulation. It's a lot of noise, a lot of people. Children find crowds very stressful. Oh, here's a fantastic, I was just thinking this one when Michelle and I were coming up. So I was asked if I would see this family a couple of weeks ago, and they had a premature baby, and that's why I agreed. Are we taping this? Okay, so I can't tell you that. I'll have to tell it to you in such a way that it's all right, because I didn't get permission from the family to use this for research purposes. I was meeting, let's say, a fictional family where they had a fictional baby that was very young. Okay, is that good enough? And so the mom asked me to meet her at such and such a place, and I was very surprised because the baby at this point had been born 32 weeks, we'll say for sake of argument, and was now only, for the sake of argument, around 8 weeks old. And I was very surprised that the meeting that where she'd asked me to meet was a restaurant. Because if I have an ordinary baby, I don't want going in public until at least a couple of months. But for a preemie, then you really start to get worried. So as I wanted to see the baby, and the baby is sound asleep. And so mom tells me that she says it's the greatest thing. whenever, we come here every day, and she sleeps like an angel when she's here. And I didn't know how to tell her that sleeping is the baby's ultimate defense against excessive stress. That's why the baby was doing it. Because if you push a baby's stress system hard enough, the only mechanism that's left to them, and to all of us, by the way, is sleep. And that's why if you're in I was once in a very stressful situation, and I kept on falling asleep, and I could even fall asleep standing up. And once until I got back to Oxford, that my professor told me, he said, well, you've not been paying attention to our lectures. It's a natural stress response. So the point here is that being in a crowded environment for babies or young children is in fact very stressful. The noises, the smells, they are so much more sensitive to smell and taste than we are. And there are lots of things that are happening in the environment. So the first thing that we look at when we study stress are things like just an environment like this. Now here's the key. What we are seeing in children today is heightened sensitivities. That's what we're seeing. And we think we know why, and you don't need to know why, just know that that's the case. So what does that mean, heightened sensitivities? Well, ask yourselves now, how many of you, there's still a slight echo from the mic. How many of you does that bother? Put your hand up. How many of you does it not bother? Take a look at that. Can you see this? So how can it be that it bothers half of you and it doesn't bother the other half of you? I'll tell you a secret. The half of you that it bothers are going to be twice as tired after tonight's lecture as the other half, because you're doing two jobs. You're burning energy to try to ignore this echo that you find annoying. The other guys, they get to just concentrate. They get to just listen to me. But I'm the same as you. That's why I'm aware of it. So for us, we're literally asking our brains, without knowing it, to do two things at the same time: pay attention and it's called inhibit the auditory distractor. You got it? Imagine now I'm dealing with a little guy. Imagine I'm dealing with a 4 or 5-year-old. On you it's nothing. You know what? You're going to be fine. Trust me. Even if it bothers you, you'll be all right. But with a little guy, this is going to demand, he doesn't have that much energy. He's using his brain to grow and all this stuff. His brain is still exploding. And so this is very expensive for him. Now, what happens with a little guy when he burns way too much trying to deal with a stressor like the noise? Well, that's real simple. The problems that I mentioned at the outset start to increase. You start to get more impulsivity, more restlessness, more trouble responding to his name, more trouble falling asleep, whatever it is. And now imagine if I yell at him. Imagine if I tell him, stop that. Sit up straight. Be quiet. You're in public. Unfortunately, of all the stressors on a child, she already nailed this. Of all the stressors on the child, anxiety's got to be number one. Fear and anxiety. They are huge consumers of energy. An unbelievable amount of their energy is dealt trying to calm themselves down when they get anxious or afraid. So I gave a really, really good example last night. We have this chart that we use, and we can show how if this stress system gets overworked, it results in a number of different kinds of physical and mental health problems. So one of the physical problems that it causes is asthma. I hope that none of you have ever had a child with asthma. This is very frightening. I have a child that, for once in her life, had an asthma attack brought on by an insect bite of all things. And I've never been so scared in my life. It is absolutely frightening as you're watching your child struggle to breathe. Now, this is caused by excessive stress. And in her case, she's not allergic to bee stings, but she'd had a very stressful day for a number of reasons. And so that's what made her susceptible in this particular occasion to the bee sting. Ordinarily, her immune system could have dealt with it efficiently. And she's had other insect bites. Would you yell at the kid? for having an asthma attack? I mean, it's bizarre. Of course not. I mean, would any of you ever think to yell at a child who's in a cafe for having an asthma attack? Well, I mean, you wouldn't think of that. But let me tell you something. The kid who's having this disruptive behavior is no different. It's the same cause. The behavior means it's just a different manifestation of an overstressed system. And so we want to respond to both of them in the same way. How? We want to soothe them. We want to calm them down in this situation. And then what we want to do is we want to figure out how come this happened? What's overstretched you? And I don't know what it's going to be for a kid. That's going to take me for a while. It could be that my child needs a little bit more exercise. It could be that my child needs a little bit more sleep. It could be that my child's having trouble with school, with the social environment. A lot of children find it very difficult to go from home into a social environment. There's so many variables here, and it can take a while, although parents, usually when we start to have this conversation, parents are therapeutic partners, literally, because if you ask them, if you lecture them, then they'll be quiet because you're the authority, you're the doctor. But if you ask them, they will in fact tell you and save me a whole whack of time, because they know. Okay? Now, what we're going to try to do with the child, this is the last step, and then I'm getting my warning. This is the last step. Okay. We're going to do this with our kids. We're going to figure out what are the strains on my child's nervous system, what are the reasons why I'm seeing these behaviors that I don't like or I find irritating. And look, I mean, children are absolute buggers. So yeah, they're going to drive you nuts, and you're going to find certain things much harder to negotiate than others. You're going to find anger. The reason why we yell at kids when they misbehave or when they're angry is because we find it very difficult to stay regulated ourselves when a child is angry. It's just a fact of human nature. But it really means nothing. It's just a behavior. The brain is this big. You don't know what's going on. So what we're going to do is, as parents, we're going to figure out how do I either calm him down or bring him up. Self-regulation is about down-regulating or up-regulating. If my child is very listless, if my child is very crabby, if my child doesn't respond to his name, I've got to figure out how do I up-regulate so that he becomes calmly focused and alert. And if my child is really anxious or hyper or whatever it is, or aggressive, I got to down-regulate and bring him down. So that's my first step. I'm going to figure out how to do that. Now the second step. I'm going to teach him how to do it. I'm going to teach him how to identify when he's calm, when he's hyper, when he's under-aroused. It's called hypo-aroused. Literally, I'm going to do it by saying to him, we use this with little guys, we'll say to them, how's your engine running? Is your engine running just right? Or is it running too fast? Or is it running too slow? And I can promise every one of you that when you ask your kid that, and your kid is actually bouncing off the walls at the moment that you ask it, he will answer, my engine's just right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to calm him down. And we're going to calm him down however we do it. So we have all these tricks, and if we get a chance in the questions, we can tell you some of the tricks we use. But we're going to calm him down and then repeat the question, now how's your engine running? Oh, now it's good. But wait a second, you said to me a second ago it was just right. No, I was wrong, now it's right. The problem that we're seeing with children today is so many of them don't know what it feels like to be calm. So that's going to be our critical step. We are going to teach them how to identify when they're calm. And trust me, I have done this with 3-year-olds with autism. If I can do it with them, I can do it with anyone. And I came back from a trip just a few months ago, and it was overseas, and I was kind of hyper because of the overseas part. And I was with my 7-year-old, and I'm putting her to sleep, and I was kind of bouncing her, and I guess I was a little too aggressive, her leg. And she says to me, Dad, you got to calm down. You are really hyper-aroused. So that's stage 2, and they can all learn this. And trust me, there's a certain age at which you can even talk about it as arousal. Once they hit puberty, you have to find another word. Now the third step. The third step is we're going to help them learn what brings them down or what brings them up. Okay? So once they know what it feels like to be calm, you don't have to say to them, you know, you should be calm. You never have to try to talk them into being calm. They will naturally want to be calm because it feels better, because it's less stressful. It's a natural desire, once we know what it is, to want to achieve that state. So all of you have got your own little routines for getting calm when you've had a tough day. Nobody has to tell you. You don't have to, you're all adults now. You're not calling your parents to say, what should I do? I'm really, you know, I had a tough day, I'm anxious. So you know that when I feel like this, I've got to go for a walk. Or I know that when I feel like this, I just have to go put my feet up and stare out the window. Whatever it is you do, you're doing it day after day whenever you feel like this because of that sensation. Well, children are no different. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with them. We're going to figure out, like with some kids, like with my daughter, what calms my daughter down is climbing trees. And literally, and there's reasons why, and we can explain this, because she's a very active child, a very sensory craving child. So, you know, if she wants to go climb a tree, the last thing I'm going to say is, no, now's not the time. I know that for whatever reason, she may not even be fully aware of this, this is going to calm her down. Okay? So we're going to help the kids figure out. Well, for my son, it's building a fort. So for years, I had this kid building the most elaborate forts, and, you know, I'm thinking, wow, you know, this is really interesting. You know, like the kid's, I don't know, he's like a little Frank Lloyd Wright. And then one day it dawned on me that he's not building forts. He's building sensory deprivation areas. He's building this little area with blankets where he can go in because the world's been a little too much. This is very cool. We're actually bringing this into the schools now, giving children these tools where they can calm themselves down. So that's the, where are we, third stage? And now the last stage is we need our children to understand what they need to avoid. We need our children to learn what are the kinds of experiences, the kinds of situations that are going to dysregulate them. It's real hard to tell a kid, let's take a real easy example. TV is very dysregulating for boys, okay, for reasons we think we can explain. And it's real tough to tell a kid not to watch TV. And I'm not even sure it's such a good idea. I think my idea is a better idea. Get rid of your TV and buy some chickens. What we can do is we can draw attention. You know, did you know that every time you watched, yeah, you know, you can watch TV, and we can now do it as a sort of negotiation. I'll let you watch TV for an hour or half an hour, but you have to be aware that, you know, every time you do this, you kind of have a fit when we turn off the TV. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to not just make a negotiation where he knows, and you can use a timer for this, he knows that he's allowed to watch it until the timer goes. If you've got boys, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And when the timer goes, the TV's off. But we're doing something further. We're actually drawing his attention to an aspect of his behavior. See, she agrees. We're drawing his attention to an aspect of his behavior which he will get. He will begin to understand the effect that this is having on him. And we can draw attention to this. We can say, you know, I'll let you watch it, but, you know, every time you go out and play hockey, you come back and you're so nice to everybody. And every time you watch TV, I'll let you watch it, but you're so mean to all of us afterwards. But however you're doing it, we want them to begin to understand, to see these connections between what they do and their subsequent behaviors. And it's always revolving around this self-regulatory mechanism. Okay, so last thought for all this, so that you can ask me questions. It's real hard to be a parent today. That's the truth. That's why you're all here. And it's hard, I think, because the internet makes it a little harder. You're bombarded with information. It's hard because of the things that Michelle was talking about. We do see the signs of stress. But here's the good news. The solutions are real easy. The solutions themselves are not rocket science. Get your kid to bed. Have your kid eat properly. Have your kid engaged in, our number one self-regulatory activity for children is sports. Sports has the most amazing effect on a kid's brain. So we want them in sports, okay? And if, for whatever reason, the child really doesn't like sports, then we go to music, because music has almost the same effect. And the third one that we'll do with little guys, all ages, little guys, adolescents, doesn't matter, is yoga. Yoga is fantastic for children, and believe it or not, they love it. And then the fourth one, which is paradoxical but true, is Taekwondo. Taekwondo is very, very good for self-regulation. It has to be non-competitive Taekwondo. So the take-home here is that we want you to, it's called reframe a child's behavior. Don't get angry. Don't get impatient. Look at the behavior for what it is. It's just a behavior. It really doesn't mean anything. And what have we learned? I mean, I have been doing this for a long time now. And I was telling them last night, and it's the honest to God truth. I don't know how long I've been doing it, I guess maybe 25 years. I've never, ever seen a bad kid. There isn't such a thing. And I've never seen a stupid kid. And I have definitely never seen a lazy kid. That's actually a contradiction in terms. But if we do the wrong things, or we allow the wrong things to be done to them, they can become lazy, bad, and stupid. Okay? So, when we get everybody on board, when we start to reframe a child's behavior, when we start to see a child's behavior through this new lens, and we tailor our interactions with the child accordingly, a new child emerges. And that child, every single child, will blow you away. I am continually, every day, astonished by the things that these kids do. It's not always what you want. In my case, my 10-year-old is an incredibly gifted ice hockey player. It's the last thing I would have chosen. But whatever it is, you live with it, and you take great joy in seeing this child come home smiling and happy, and that's what we want. That's all that we want. We want every single child. We don't care about the other stuff. I don't care, you know, he's going to university, whatever. All I want is, I want my kid to be happy. And I can do it. I can do it with every single kid. Okay? So that's your take home, and now, let you ask some questions or not, Margaret? I need some water.
We've got some roving mics here. I think we've got probably at least 15 minutes for some questions. So if you've been pondering what Stuart's been saying and the questions come into your mind, put up your hand and one of our staff here will come and bring it to you. Do we have any questions? There's a lady up 3/4 of the way up, Satir, with a red top.
May I ask? Dr. Shanker, you did mention video games, and you said you talk about that later or referred to it. Is there, you know, I think it's a problem with a lot of children, the amount of time they watch video games or engaged in them. Could you perhaps sort of enlighten us as to the dangers or whatever of those?
So have you ever looked at these video games? Have you ever looked at something like World of Warcraft or Grand Theft Auto? Or so you have to ask yourself the following question: why? I mean, and the game is nonsense. What is it that my son's playing? So my son came home that some kid had lent him his video game, and it's got this game called Angry Birds. So I'm looking at the game, and I'm thinking, unfortunately, you know a little science, you know what's going on, but the game itself is nonsense, right? But what happens is that when the kid gets his reward, he gets a little squirt of something called dopamine. It's a little neurohormone. And dopamine makes you feel good. Dopamine is what we call the reward neurohormone. So every time he gets his reward, he gets a little shot and it feels good, but now we have a problem. The brain habituates. The brain gets used to this dopamine. And so the brain says, well, I need a little bit more. Either more of the game, or I need a bit more of a reaction to the game in order to get that same in order to get that same feeling, that same nice high. And so what we're scared about is two things. The first thing that we're scared, well, I mean, there's a couple of things. First of all, you know, we can't help, like we see these kids that are spending, they're staying up all night playing these games. And for us, that's very frightening because they need to sleep. I don't remember if I've told you this tonight or not because I'm tired myself. but our children, your children, all ages, are sleeping 2 hours less a night than 10 years ago. And this actually has a very significant effect on the brain. It heightens impulsivity. So we're trying to figure out what's going on here, and what's going on. The primary culprit is actually internet and video games. But they need to sleep. And this is particular, I don't know if you've got, how many of you have teenagers? Our teenagers are in real trouble now. They're chronically underslept. And there's a very interesting thing that goes on with the teenage brain where they go to bed later. Their brain's actually going through a change. It's called melatonin transcription, where they need to fall asleep later, but they still need 9 to 9.5 hours sleep. Okay, so we're scared about video games because they're undersleeping. We're scared about video games because the visual stimulation. Video games, by the way, have some positive effects. So it's not like you have to go cold turkey. There are positive benefits, and some games are really good at developing thinking skills, dexterity. The problem is always with these kinds of things, excess. So excess is an extreme load on the visual processing system in the brain. It will tire them, okay? We're worried that what's happening is that if the child becomes addicted to the game, they are in fact going onto an addictive trail. That as they get older, the brain is going to start to crave more and more, I don't know how to say this, disturbing forms of getting the dopamine. Now the last point. Children are self-regulating with the video game, okay? A video game is a form of regulating themselves. There are all these ways that we can regulate ourselves. We can regulate ourselves with alcohol. Alcohol is a form of self-regulating. Smoking is a form of regulating yourself. The problem is that some forms of self-regulation have extremely worrying side effects. And so what we really want is not to say to the child, we have this classic case that we wrote up where this kid we were working with was addicted to video games. And we know that the worst thing we can do is to cold turkey force him to stop. You cannot do that. It's too jarring. What we want to do is wean him from the video game to another form of self-regulation that is healthy, that is nourishing. So in this particular case, what we found with this child, the road for this kid was music. He turned out to be quite good at music, and he became a fairly well-known member of a jazz trio in a small Ontario town. But the point is that he gradually weaned off of the video game to do the music, because the music was doing all these things, and this is what I wanted to say to you. You didn't know you asked such a complex question. Because the music did so much that the video game didn't do. Because with music, he got genuine self-esteem. He was admired by his friends. He was out in public. He was performing. And so what was happening with the video game is it's giving the child such an artificial sense of achievement on top of everything else. So what we want to do is we want to get them into other activities that will regulate them that are good for them. And there's so many good ways to regulate. Art, drama. So there are layers of reasons why we are scared about it, okay? And quite honestly, I'm scared by anything that has been designed to manipulate kids. And boy, trust me, you would not believe the amount of careful thought that goes into how I grab them, how I sucker them in and keep them, and then escalate so they'll buy another product. Okay? Good enough answer?
Hello. I'm curious to know how
I
would
don't know
you
where
best...
you are.
I'm here.
Gotcha.
How would you best teach a non-verbal or echolalic child the concept of what is calm and not calm, and how do you get that information across to them and know that they understand the concept you're teaching?
So I have to translate her question for the rest of you. So this is either a mom or a therapist who's dealing with a child who is on the spectrum, a child who has autism. And so her question is really, really good question. So if you work with autism, you'll know why that was such a good question, because there's different ways of answering it. The first thing we want to do is we need to get that kid. The first step to self-regulation is something called initiation. Where are you sitting again? Where are you? Put your hand up again. Are you a clinician or a parent?
Both a parent and a teacher.
You're a teacher. So the first step is initiation. The single strongest predictor of how well a kid is going to self-regulate is when they start initiating. And that means, look at this, give me that, drawing your attention to something that they find interesting. And that does not have to be verbal. In fact, kids start initiating at around the age of 6 months. The initial signs of co-regulation, so if you want, Greenspan and I wrote a book about just that question called The First Idea, okay? So the first signs, when we work with children, what we want to see is certainly by the age of 9 months, I want my kid initiating. And if my kid's not initiating, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get down on the floor and I'm going to make sure he plays with me, and if he doesn't want to play with me, I'm going to make a game out of getting playfully obstructive. But what I want is, I want him to get into these interactions with me. And in the beginning with my nonverbal child, nonverbal is a kid who doesn't have language. And she's talking about older children that don't have language. I don't know how old, but that's what she's talking about. So the first step is he should be able to stay with me in a back and forth interaction for 3 to 4 circles of communication, okay? That's your first step. And you can do this with babies as young as 6 months. Then the next step is, I want this to be circles of communication of 50, back and forth, staying with me. You initiate, I respond. So what we're going to do is we're going to create meaningful kinds of games where we get the back and forth going. And guess what happens? What'll happen is the child, remember I said there were 6 core stages, so that's number 3. 4 is language. And the child will make this, sorry, that's number 4, 5 is language. No, that's 4. It's been a while since I've done this. And then the child will naturally start to get functional language. The language will come, but not until you've got this. So you can negotiate around self-regulation without language. Just having these exchanges is incredibly regulating. Just being able to direct your attention non-verbally is incredibly, it reduces the stress on these children phenomenally. Is that a good enough answer? Yes. It's a kind of you can see it's a kind of a sophisticated question good question though. I can hear you anyways. I'll translate for you.
Thank you. Have 2 children,
Yes.
15-year-old boy and the daughter's 18 months younger. The daughter is definitely better at self-regulation, she's organised and so on. A lot of good indicators. Son is not too bad, but he's not quite as good. He's more impulsive and whatever. For years and years I've been told that boys are different. Girls and boys are different. Is that true?
Yes.
How
Now
so?
what do I do?
So,
How are they different, or
how do I handle it?
How do you
Is it
handle it?
just normal, and should I just relax?
Okay, so
with
should we talk about teenagers for a sec? Okay. So this is a good news, bad news scenario. All right, so you all know that the brain goes through this period of explosion from 0 to 3, right? Well, it goes through a second one, 10 to 12. It's the second period of brain explosion. And something very interesting is happening in this period of brain explosion. And the child is moving away from our parental influence. The brain is literally rewiring to be with their friends. This is fascinating to see with, if you've got the typical 9-year-old who wants, all he wants to do is be with mom and dad. And then all of a sudden, 1 year later, all he wants to do is be with his friends. Well, nature's actually driving him into this. So it means that our role as parents trying to guide them in this process is changing. It doesn't mean that it's stopped. We still have a role for parental guidance, but we have to recognize that whatever we do, the main aspect, is your child got friends?
Yes.
Okay, your son I meant. So we have to recognize that, first of all, he's going to get his primary regulation from his friends, and boys will regulate each other. It's fascinating to watch them on a sports team, the way they'll pick each other up or, encourage each other or say, it doesn't matter. So that's our first clue. Our first clue is it tells us that they need to be involved with functional groups. They need to be involved. So when we start to get worried as parents is when we know that this group of kids that my child is getting their regulation from is aimless, dysregulated, whatever it is. So we're really going to look for those kinds of group activities and encourage our children to do that. What we have learned for kids, so his son is 15, and what we have learned is they need enormous amounts of activity, enormous amounts of exercise. And so they've been experimenting with this in the US, and we're starting in Canada, where they have classrooms where they put exercise bikes in the classroom. They have treadmills where the child has a desk on top of the treadmill. What they find is that the more the child exercises, and it does not have to be sport, right? It can be, if the child doesn't like sport, they've done it with you create like incentives on the spin bike or whatever it is, a Stairmaster. But what happens is I don't know if you heard him talk about his son's impulsivity, that will naturally decline. Now the third thing, there are a couple of programs that are fantastic for teenagers. Anything that develops mindfulness in a teenager. There is, and I don't know why I'm blanking on it, but there is a program that was developed here in Australia, a mindfulness program for teenage boys that we use in Canada that's very, very good. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, if it's a little bit more serious, is very good for a teenage boy. And now the last thing. They have the most extraordinary capacity at the age of 15. They can do amazing things. They need real challenges. And so one of the things that we looked at, this is puzzling. These kids that he's describing, like his son, do absolutely brilliantly on Outward Bound. So you know what Outward Bound is here? Or? Okay, you actually have a guy who studies this in Australia. His name is John Hattie. So what's interesting about Outward Bound is it's a new challenge and it's a group challenge. So now what we're starting to think is that what we need is to try to direct my child into group activities where there is a challenge that they're not accustomed to, something that takes them out of the ordinary, and they seem to come back from these experiences transformed. Partly what's happening is the discovery of what they're capable of. Partly is the discovery that they have this enormous potential to do things that we can't do. In fact, I won't go into the details. So everything I've talked about tonight is really geared at children 0 to 6 or maybe 0 to 8. But the principles stay the same. It's just the vehicles change. And what we really want, we had this caller yesterday, and I loved what he said. What we really want is we want that kid, every single kid, to actually believe, not just from us, but to believe that they can do something amazing, that they are capable of something in life that is just really incredible. Unfortunately, they won't believe us. As parents, we've lost that credibility, so it's very important. The last piece of this puzzle is it's very important to find those mentors, those adults working with kids, and you know when you see them, you can see what's happening with the child, and it really, you just have to find the activity that the kid likes doing and is good at. And the point here is they will continue to need, there's an argument out there right now by a guy called John Abbott. They need a version of the apprentice system. They need some adult who is overseeing what the group is doing and pushing them, encouraging them, reaffirming them, but they need to do it for themselves. Is that a good enough answer? Okay, it's an interesting question, by the way. It's something that we're working on very intensively right now, so stay tuned.
Over here in the middle. Satir.
I'm surprised that nobody asked me about sleep. I usually don't get to do these without getting, how do I get my kid to sleep?
You mentioned earlier on about how the teenage brain starts readjusting itself as far as sleep patterns go.
Yes.
Could you just talk a little bit about the benefits or the possible benefits of actually readjusting high school
Should be done.
functioning hours?
Should be done. Is that a good enough answer? It should be done right away. Okay, so here's your question. So for those of you, are you a teacher? Or are you a parent? Yes. With the teenage brain, so you go through a circadian rhythm, right? Oh shit. So we go through a circadian rhythm where we produce a natural neurohormone that puts us to sleep, that we need to go into that soothing sleep. Around 2 million years ago, we see evidence in the fossil record that a new human stage evolved called adolescence. And adolescence was marked by a number of things, and one of the incredible things was that their circadian rhythm, and this comes back to your question actually, their circadian rhythm changes so that the peak in melatonin, which puts you to sleep, starts to happen 2 or 3 hours later. There's probably a function for this, and our guess is that adolescents a couple of million years ago were serving as the sentries. It would have made sense so that the adults could sleep. There would have been some function to it. Now we have a problem. We refuse to, so now what we'll say is, well, you know what? School's still going to start at 7:30. High school's still going to start at 7:30, so get your kid to bed. But they can't fall asleep at 9 o'clock anymore. Yet the tragedy in this, and this was her question, this was her point, the tragedy in this is they still need 9 to 9.5 hours sleep. That's the problem. And now there's a part of the brain called the striatal system. And when the teenage brain becomes underslept, this becomes inflamed. And when it's inflamed, it produces impulsivity. And so, sometimes, I mean, really, the solutions are really very simple. You're not going to force the kid to go to bed at 9 anymore, so you can give that fight. Nature's against you. But what we have to figure out now is how do we talk the schools into recognizing that school should be beginning at 11 in the morning? And in case you're interested, the argument against it, I mean, I've been having this fight forever. So the argument goes, well, he's got an after-school job, or he's playing on a sports team, or, there's 1,000 reasons why we can't get it through, but it needs to be done, and it will eventually happen. And we have tested this, and the results are phenomenal. Right, so all of a sudden, you get these kids that were having trouble, and now everything smooths out. And so we're going to look at lots and lots of. So I can't believe we didn't do sleep in general, though. Are you telling me your kids don't have problems falling asleep? Can I tell one last?
Okay, I'm going to put him on a 2-minute warning
I can't do it in 2 minutes.
Short version.
We got this one family comes in. And so they got this little guy, and the little guy, he's 3 years old, and he looks autistic. He's perseverating and self-stimming, this kind of stuff, and he's gaze averting. And they took him to a psychologist, and the psychologist said he doesn't have autism. We don't know what it is, so they brought him into us because they wanted us to say has autism so they could get the government, So anyways, we spent a couple of hours with this kid, and the clinicians came in and said to me, we don't know what's going on, but he doesn't have autism. We just don't know what it is. So we're sitting around the boardroom table with the dad. He's a young dad. He was a computer programmer. He was about 22. He'd moved to Toronto from Western Canada, all alone, no family. Mom was at work. So we're trying to figure out what's going on with this kid. And this short version is after a very long, I'm getting angrier and angrier with this dad's really bugging me. And one of the clinicians, the junior clinician at the back says, what time does he go to sleep? And the dad says, well, every night between 3 and 4 in the morning. He's a 3-year-old. So I said to the guy, why? So he says, he doesn't like to go to sleep. So what they had done was they had a shag carpet, and they were putting the kid down. They put pillows all around him. They let him thrash around until he falls asleep. And every night he'd fall asleep between 3 and 4. The problem was this is a huge drain on the nervous system. And so he was resorting to autistic behaviors as a way of trying to calm his nervous system. But he didn't have autism. He was tired. Why wasn't he falling asleep? because there are 6 stages of self-regulation. There are 6 stages of arousal. The 5th stage is called hyperarousal. And he was putting the kid down when he was hyperaroused. And if you put a child down when they're hyperaroused and you leave them alone, they will go to the 6th stage, which is flooded, tantrum. And they'll stay there until they exhaust themselves and fall asleep. It's very, very bad for the nervous system. So we had to do 2 things to help this child learn how to sleep. The first thing is we had to figure out why he was hyperaroused. In his case, he had food allergies, he had a number of things. So we had to reduce those stressors. But the second thing is we had to help the parents learn how to take him from 5 to 4, how to downregulate him from 5 to 4, from 4 to 3, from 3 to 2. The key here is if a child is having sleep problems, falling asleep or staying asleep, it's because they're hyperaroused. So don't leave them alone. Don't think that you're going to solve this problem by not responding to the child's needs. Instead, what you've got to do is figure out why they're hyperaroused, how to calm them down, and you have to do it over and over. And trust me, the single strongest predictor of lifetime of mental health is learning how to go to sleep themselves, wanting to do it, enjoying falling asleep, enjoying that relaxing experience. So however long it takes, you have to do it, but there's one thing that you need to remember. This is a rich experience for us as parents. Honest to God, I look back at these times when I got to do this with my children. I would give anything to be able to do this again. We had only one rule when I did it. I'm real good at this, by the way. I can put any kid to sleep real fast. And the reason is, I love doing it. I love being alone with a child. No one is allowed to interrupt. No one is allowed to bug me, call me to the phone. This is our chance to be together. There's nothing I miss more. I wish that I could still do it with my kids, but now it's get out, Dad, I want to read. But the thing is that when we both enjoy it, when we both embrace this experience of being calm and alone together, that child will become a fabulous sleeper. And you can do it, and it will happen, okay? So there's lots of reasons why it's happening. No TV after 6:30. There are lots of things that you have to do, but enjoy the process. Go with it, okay?
I think we'd all agree there's been an awful lot of take-home lessons from Stuart's talk today, some really practical suggestions of things we as parents can try to assist our children as they self-regulate. Stuart has a whole lot of information that you can access, I'm sure, via the Commissioner's website, and that will be just an entry point to a whole lot of material. I think he's really just raised the lid on a whole lot of issues for us today. I'm glad he probably didn't realise he's putting in a plug for some of the programs that our department runs with the Lewin Ocean Adventures, our Bush Rangers program, how we support Duke of Edinburgh scheme, all very similar to the Outward Bound program, developing those youth skills. So thanks for that, Stuart. So it's really over to you as parents, if you're interested to do some more reading, research and try out some of the strategies Stuart's talked about. Stuart does have to go off to another engagement today, so he's not going to be able to hang around and answer your individual questions, so that's why I really do encourage you to go to that website and start to do some reading and research of your own. On your chairs is an evaluation form. We'd really be grateful if you could take 2 minutes to give us some feedback about how you think today went, and leave them either on the chairs or on the tables as you go out. So it just leaves me to once again thank St Mary's for a fabulous evening hosting us here today, to Stuart for a fabulous presentation, and to our partners bringing it to you tonight, WACOS, Child Australia Department for Community. So thanks for attending, everyone. Safe drive.